Welcome to another deep dive with us. This time we're headed to 1980s Chicago,
Oh, yeah.
the city where the American dream got tangled up with a booming drug trade.
Yeah.
And our main player in all this is Fluky Stokes,
Wow.
a name that just screams extravagance and controversy,
Yeah.
and a life that was as captivating as it was tragic.
It's a good word.
So we've got excerpts from his Wikipedia page,
Right.
ready to unpack a story that asks,
Okay.
was Fluky Stokes just a product of his environment, or did he actively shape it?
I think what makes Stokes so fascinating is that he's not just another gangster. He
Yeah.
was almost like a celebrity,
Yeah.
So flamboyant. His life really makes you question the allure of wealth and power, especially when they're obtained outside the law.
Okay, so to really get into this, we got to set the stage.
Yeah.
Fluky Stokes wasn't just a drug kingpin.
Right.
He was known for, flaunting his wealth.
Oh, yeah.
Silk suits, diamond rings, high-stakes gambling in Las Vegas.
Oh.
He even claimed gambling as his income on tax returns.
Oh, wow.
It's like he wanted everyone to know he was living large.
Yeah.
Consequences be damned.
That's a really good point.
Right.
It wasn't enough for him to just have money. He needed to be seen.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if that was part of some big plan or just a deep need for recognition.
And speaking of making a statement,
Yeah,
we can't talk about Fluky without talking about the Cadillac coffin.
of course.
So his son Willie, the Wimp Stokes Jr., was also involved in the drug trade, and sadly, he was murdered in '84.
Yeah.
And Fluky decided to give him a send-off no one would ever forget.
This wasn't just any funeral.
Oh, no.
Willie was laid to rest in a custom-designed Cadillac Seville casket.
Wow.
It had working headlights and taillights, white wall tires,
Sure.
and even a personalized Wimp license plate.
That's incredible.
And he was dressed to the nines, a red suit, a gray hat, diamond rings,
Wow.
even had $100 bills tucked between his fingers.
I'm picturing this whole thing, and it just seems unbelievable.
I know.
This wasn't just about honoring his son, was it?
Yeah.
Feels like a show of force,
Yeah.
like a challenge to death itself.
Exactly.
Even in death, he's in control.
It wasn't just grief, it was a message to the world. I'm still in charge.
And that funeral became legendary, even inspiring Stevie Ray Vaughan's song, Willie the Wimp.
Oh, wow.
It really cemented Fluky's image in everyone's minds.
It did.
But what about Fluky himself? He lived just as extravagantly as his son,
Oh, absolutely.
maybe even more so.
He loved the finer things in life. Silk suits, diamond rings, won and lost fortunes gambling in Vegas.
Yeah.
He even threw a $200,000 party for his 30th wedding anniversary in 1985.
Oh my gosh.
Talk about a lavish lifestyle.
But here's where things get really interesting,
Okay.
and maybe a little contradictory.
Uh-huh.
Despite renewing his vows at that anniversary party,
Yeah.
Fluky was out with his mistress when he was murdered just a year later.
It really makes you think about Fluky's image. Was it all just a show? Was he trying to project something totally different from his real life?
Yeah, and his death was just as dramatic as his life.
Oh, tell me about it.
So in November of '86, he's dropping off his mistress,
Right.
and these two gunmen ambush him in his limo.
Oh, wow.
He gets shot multiple times while he's on his car phone.
Oh, jeez.
His driver, Ronald Johnson, was also killed,
Oh, man.
and the mistress survived by ducking down in the back seat.
Gosh, and this was all happening while the DEA was closing in on Fluky with a grand jury indictment.
So he was living a double life,
Yeah.
the flashy public figure and the target of a huge criminal investigation. What were they even looking at him for?
Well, they were building a case against him for drug racketeering, running a criminal enterprise, and tax evasion.
Sounds like Fluky's world was about to come crashing down.
It really does. It's interesting how Fluky's life kind of mirrors what was happening in Chicago in the 80s.
Yeah.
You had this booming stock market, but also a lot of poverty and inequality. And organized crime just thrived in that kind of environment.
Right.
It offered a path to wealth and power that was totally outside the system.
So you're saying Fluky's rise was almost like a symptom of the times?
Yeah, possibly.
Like he wouldn't have been as big in a different era?
It's definitely possible. He really embodies those contradictions of the 80s,
I see what you mean.
The obsession with money, the willingness to break the rules,
Yeah.
and that disillusionment a lot of people felt with the American dream.
Right.
It all ties together.
And there's this theme of Fluky presenting himself as a Robin Hood type figure,
Right.
like a benefactor to his community.
Yeah.
How much of that was real generosity versus strategy?
Hard to say for sure. But a lot of organized crime figures throughout history have cultivated that image.
Yeah.
Providing for the community helps them gain acceptance, which lets them operate more freely.
So it's like a trade-off.
Yeah.
They give material support, and the community looks the other way.
Yeah.
But people knew what Fluky was doing, right?
Of course.
So how does that work?
It creates a moral gray area.
I guess so.
People see the good deeds.
Yeah.
And it's harder to condemn them.
It's like a blurred line.
Yeah. Especially in communities where poverty and lack of opportunity are widespread.
Right. It's a reminder that the lines between good and evil aren't always clear.
Yeah.
And Fluky's story still resonates with people today, even decades later.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that is?
I think there's a fascination with people who live outside the rules.
Yeah.
Those who achieve a level of success most can only dream of.
Even if it's through illegal means.
Yeah.
Right.
It's the allure of the anti-hero.
Yeah.
The bad boy with a heart of gold.
But we can't forget, Fluky contributed to the problems that plagued his community.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
While his generosity might have helped some people, his involvement in the drug trade definitely caused harm.
Yeah.
And it perpetuated those cycles of poverty and violence.
It's like a reminder that even the most captivating stories can have a dark side.
Mm.
And Fluky's own downfall came pretty quickly.
You did.
Remember, he was dressed really casually when he was murdered?
Yeah.
It was a huge contrast to his usual flashy style.
Almost like he had a feeling something was coming.
Really?
Sweatpants, sneakers, no jewelry.
Like he knew it was over.
Like his world of luxury and power was about to disappear.
And even in death, Fluky made a statement.
He did.
His funeral was more low-key than his son's, but it was still an event.
Yeah.
Over 7,000 people attended.
Wow.
Shows how much he impacted the community.
It does.
He was buried in a custom coffin with a powder blue interior.
Oh, wow.
And he was dressed up in a blue suit, silk shirt, tie, handkerchief, python shoes, sunglasses, a portable telephone.
A portable phone.
Yeah.
It's almost funny, but it shows his need to be connected, to be in control.
Even in death.
Right. Like he wanted to decide how he'd be remembered.
Exactly.
It's like the Cadillac coffin all over again.
Yeah.
They both seem to defy death, projecting an image of power and wealth that goes beyond the grave.
But what about the people who went to those funerals?
Yeah.
What do you think brought them there?
I don't know.
Was it just morbid curiosity or genuine respect?
Or something else entirely.
It's wild how Fluky Stokes built his empire on illegal stuff, but still had this big presence in his community.
Yeah.
What was it about him that people connected with?
Maybe it was him going against the grain, you know?
Yeah.
Making his own rules in a system that felt rigged.
Mm-hmm.
Especially back then in the 80s.
Yeah.
Opportunities were limited.
Right. Especially for marginalized communities.
Exactly.
So he was like a rebel.
Kinda, yeah.
Rejecting the normal path to success.
Right. And his methods were obviously criminal.
Of course.
But his success, even though it was dirty,
Yeah.
might have resonated with people who felt stuck.
Like they couldn't get ahead.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like he showed that even with a bad hand, you can still win.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you got to bend the rules. Yeah. But that brings us back to our big question.
Okay.
Was Fluky a product of his environment? Or did he shape it?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
On one hand, he was definitely shaped by Chicago in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Limited opportunities, the pull of easy money.
Yeah.
All that fueled his rise.
But he wasn't just along for the ride.
No.
He chose to do illegal things.
Yeah. Built his empire through crime.
Right.
He made choices that affected him and tons of other people.
He was both a product and a shaper.
Exactly.
That's what makes his story so interesting.
It really is.
It makes us think about individual choices versus society's influence.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what success really means.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you win in a system that feels rigged?
Right.
Can you achieve the American dream without being shady?
Big questions.
Yeah. And they're still relevant today.
Definitely. Even though Fluky's gone.
His story is a warning about power and taking shortcuts.
A cautionary tale, for sure.
It reminds us that illegal success comes at a cost.
Yeah.
Not just for you, but for everyone.
It does.
Behind all the flash and wealth,
Mm-hmm.
there's real pain
Real consequences.
that we can't ignore.
You can't.
So as we wrap up this deep dive on Fluky Stokes,
Okay.
we'll leave you with this.
Right.
Was he a villain? A folk hero?
Or somewhere in between.
Like so much of his life, there's no easy answer.
Nope.
It makes us think about our own values.
Yeah.
What would we sacrifice for success?
What compromises would we make?
And it forces us to confront how complex people are.
Exactly.
Fluky Stokes lived on the edge,
He did.
full of contradictions.
So many layers.
And his story even decades later, still fascinates us.
It does.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We hope it sparked some curiosity and gave you something to think about.
Definitely.
Remember, every story has layers, and even a life as crazy as Fluky Stokes can teach us about ourselves and the world.
Absolutely. All right, let's dive into the life of Frank Lucas. This guy was a drug lord who built a serious empire in 1970s Harlem, and we're using his Wikipedia article to guide us. So get ready for a wild ride. Now, Lucas wasn't your average gangster. He's known for saying he, skipped the mafia middlemen and got his heroin straight from the Golden Triangle.
Yeah, that's what makes Lucas so interesting. He didn't want to play by the mafia's rules. Instead, he went right to the source, the Golden Triangle. You know, that region in Southeast Asia, notorious for opium production. It was like a lawless zone, perfect for someone like Lucas to operate under the radar. And this wasn't just about getting cheaper heroin. By going around the mafia, Lucas showed everyone how weak their system was, and that had ripple effects on organized crime in the U.S. for years.
Wow, so his actions had a way bigger impact than just his own business, huh? Okay, so I've heard stories about how he smuggled heroin in coffins of American servicemen coming back from Vietnam. It's a pretty dark image.
Yeah, that story was in the movie American Gangster, but it's been disputed. Lucas's supposed partner, Leslie Ike Atkinson, denied it ever happened.
So the coffin thing's a bit of a mystery. Either way, Lucas's path from a small town to a big-time kingpin is fascinating. Let's go back to his childhood in LaGrange, North Carolina. He grew up in the rural South during the Jim Crow era. Lucas claimed witnessing a horrible event as a kid steered him toward crime.
Right, he said that seeing his 12-year-old cousin murdered by the Ku Klux Klan was a turning point for him. He accused his cousin of hitting on a white woman. You can understand how an experience like that would mess someone up.
It's tough to imagine the kind of impact that would have, and things didn't get much easier for him as he got older. He had a run-in with a former employer, and it ended in violence, theft, and arson. Not exactly model citizen behavior, right? His mom, worried sick about him, told him to leave North Carolina, which is how he ended up in Harlem.
And that's where he supposedly met Bumpy Johnson, the notorious gangster. Lucas always said he was Johnson's driver for 15 years, but people have questioned that. Even Johnson's widow disputed how close they actually were.
So even his early days have some conflicting stories. But whether he worked closely with Johnson or not, Lucas clearly figured out how to navigate the criminal world. After Johnson died, Lucas set his sights on the drug trade. He realized quickly that he'd need to outsmart the mafia families. They were the ones controlling the heroin coming into New York. So that's where his trip to Bangkok becomes super important.
You got it. That trip changed everything. He met Leslie Ike Atkinson there, the guy who was said to have connections with opium growers in the Golden Triangle. That meeting was a turning point for Lucas. He realized he could cut out the mafia completely and get heroin straight from Asia.
So he teams up with Atkinson, and because he was such a good strategist, he saw this as an amazing chance. Getting rid of the middleman meant he could control it all, the quality, how much, and most importantly, the price.
Exactly. That's what led to Blue Magic, his infamous brand of heroin. What made it stand out was its purity. It was almost 100% pure.
Wow, so what did that do to the drug market at the time?
Well, think about it. Back then, most street heroin was cut with all sorts of stuff. But Lucas's product was way stronger. So it was more desirable and, of course, way more dangerous. This meant he could charge more and build a loyal customer base, sadly.
So he was making serious money then. I heard he was pulling in $1 million a day at one point.
Now, while that is impressive, I think we should be a little skeptical of that number. Even Lucas himself admitted later that it was an exaggeration. But there's no doubt he made a ton of money. Real estate, a massive ranch in North Carolina, even a breeding bull worth a fortune.
That's a classic rags to riches story, just with a really dark side. But here's what's interesting. Even with all that cash, Lucas didn't show it off. Why was that?
Lucas was smart. He knew that flashing your wealth would attract attention you didn't want, like from the police. He dressed simply and liked to stay under the radar. He understood that it was important to not draw attention to himself. Lucas wasn't your typical flashy gangster. He was more of a businessman who knew how to stay in the game.
He was playing the long game, which makes his downfall even more crazy. In 1975, it all came crashing down. Picture this, a cold January morning. Lucas is at his home in Teaneck, New Jersey, probably having a cup of coffee when, bam, a DEA task force busts through the door.
It was a carefully planned raid, years in the making. The Z Team, a special task force, had been working hard. They were infiltrating Lucas's network, gathering evidence, building a case against him.
So they finally had enough to get him. What happened during the raid?
They took a bunch of cash, almost $600,000. But Lucas always insisted there was way more. Millions stashed in the attic that the officers took for themselves. We might never know what really happened that day. But the raid was the beginning of the end for Lucas's empire.
Sounds like something out of a movie. So this arrest leads to one of the most ethically tricky parts of Lucas's story, his decision to work with the authorities. He turned informant. What are your thoughts on that?
It's definitely a controversial move. He gave him everything, his whole operation, names, the whole 9 yards. In exchange, they gave him a lighter sentence and protection for him and his family.
Wow, I didn't see that coming. Lucas turning informant adds a whole new layer to this. But before we get into that, let's look at what happened because of his cooperation. I understand it led to a lot of drug-related convictions.
Yeah, his testimony was a big reason why over 100 people were convicted on drug charges. It was a huge blow to the drug trade. But, Lucas Freedom didn't last. In 1984, he got into trouble again. He was caught trying to trade heroin and cash for cocaine.
It seems like some habits are hard to break. What happened next?
He was sentenced to another 7 years in prison. It just goes to show how hard it is to get away from that life, even for someone who had it all. Money, power, success. Lucas's story is a powerful example of how crime can trap you and how hard it is to escape.
It shows that even the people at the top can fall. But before we move on to his later years and talk about American Gangster, let's think about something that often gets overlooked: his family life. How did he balance being a drug lord with being a husband and a father? This isn't something people talk about a lot, but it gives us a different perspective on him.
You're right. That is an interesting and often ignored part of his life. Lucas was married to Julie Ferret. She was also convicted for her role in his drug empire and went to prison. They had a complicated relationship. They even lived apart for a while. But eventually, they got back together and stayed married for decades.
That's wild. Their story says a lot about the crazy relationships that happen in organized crime. The loyalty, the sacrifices, the secrets. It reminds us that behind all the headlines and the drama, there are real people living really complicated lives. And Lucas was a father, too. He had 7 children. It's difficult to picture a ruthless drug lord as a family man.
It's this kind of contradiction that makes you ask a lot of questions. What was it like for his kids growing up with that legacy? How did he handle the moral compromises and all the secrets he had? We may never know the answers to these questions, but they're important for understanding who Frank Lucas really was, as a complete person.
Yeah, it definitely adds another layer to his story. And speaking of complex stories, we got to talk about American Gangster. The movie from 2007 with Denzel Washington as Lucas, it brought his story to a whole new audience.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It was a huge hit. And Lucas was actually involved in making it. He even gave Denzel Washington tips on how to hold a gun. Talk about authenticity, right?
Pretty interesting, huh? But the movie caused a lot of controversy, too. Some people said it made Lucas look too good, like some kind of hero fighting a corrupt system. But like we talked about, the reality was way more complicated.
And there were things that weren't even true in it, right? Oh, absolutely. Former DEA agents who worked on the case sued Universal. They said the movie made them look bad and twisted the truth. Even Lucas admitted that only a little bit of the movie was accurate.
So American Gangster might be a fun movie. But we gotta remember that Hollywood changes things. It makes you wonder how much we can trust movies about real people and events.
It's a good reminder to be critical of what we watch and read, especially stuff based on real events. We have to look deeper and try to get different perspectives.
Speaking of perspectives, Lucas's legacy is a mixed bag. He was a ruthless criminal who made money off other people's suffering, no doubt. But he also helped the authorities take down a big part of the drug trade.
Yeah, it's that duality that makes him so fascinating. He represents those contradictions in human nature, capable of doing terrible things, but also unexpectedly cooperating with the law. He's hard to put into a neat category, and that's what makes his story so interesting.
He had a long life. He passed away in 2019 at 88 years old. His story really reflects a crazy time in American history, when drugs were everywhere and organized crime had a lot of power.
And it makes us think about some hard truths about race, poverty, and the systems that can keep people trapped in a cycle of crime. Lucas's story still resonates today because it forces us to look at all the things, the complicated things that contribute to someone like him rising to power.
It leaves you with a lot to think about. Lucas might be gone, but his impact is still felt in pop culture, in how we understand the drug trade, and in the ongoing debate about criminal justice reform.
It's amazing how Lucas's life connected with so many important events in America. The Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, the war on drugs. He was both shaped by these events and helped shape them.
Yeah, exactly. His life was a mix of ambition, betrayal, and ultimately facing the consequences of breaking the law.
Lucas's story challenges us to look beyond what's obvious, to think about the things in society that lead to organized crime, and to really grapple with the tough ethical questions about law enforcement. It's a story that, even though it's about dark stuff, shows us the human condition and all its messy and captivating reality.
So, as we're wrapping up our deep dive into the life of Frank Lucas, what are some of the key things we should remember?
Well, I think it's important to realize that Lucas's story isn't just about him. It's a reflection of a specific time and place in American history, a time when it was hard to tell right from wrong, and when people were willing to do anything for power and money.
And for you personally, what stands out as particularly insightful or interesting from everything we've learned?
You know, what really gets me is how Lucas shook things up in the drug trade. His willingness to go straight to the source, the Golden Triangle, was a total game changer. It exposed how weak the mafia's control was, and it had lasting effects on organized crime.
That's a good point. It shows how strategic he was and how he knew how to take advantage of opportunities. But we can't forget about all the damage he caused. The lives lost, the families broken, the communities destroyed by addiction.
Absolutely. We have to acknowledge the human cost of his crimes. And while American Gangster might have made him look glamorous, it's important to remember the truth.
And to always look for different perspectives. To question the stories we're told. Frank Lucas's story is a reminder that the truth is usually messy and complicated. There are no easy answers, only tough questions.
That's a perfect way to put it. Lucas's life was a paradox, a mix of ambition and ruthlessness, success and destruction. It's a story that still fascinates and challenges us. It makes us question our assumptions and reminds us of the power of human ambition, for good or bad.
That's a good place to stop for today. But before we go, I've got one last question for you. After everything we've learned, how would you answer this? Was Frank Lucas a product of his environment? Someone who came from poverty and racism and built his own empire? Or was he just a heartless criminal who took advantage of the system for himself?
Wow, that's a tough one. It deserves a lot of thought. I don't think there's a simple answer. There's probably a bit of both. His experiences with poverty, racism, and violence definitely influenced his choices. But we also have to hold him responsible for his actions and the harm he caused. In the end, I think it's up to each person to think about those questions and come to their own conclusions.
Well said. And to our listener, we encourage you to keep exploring this story and what it means. Learn more about the drug trade, the criminal justice system, and the things in society that contribute to crime and poverty. Frank Lucas might be gone, but the conversation about his legacy and what it means for us continues. Keep asking questions, stay curious, and never stop learning. It's amazing how one person's life can be a part of so many big moments in history, and how it can make people argue and debate. So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Frank Lucas, what's the one thing you hope our listeners will remember from all this?
Well, I hope they understand that even though Lucas's story is really interesting, it's not that unusual. It shows us bigger problems in society, like poverty, racism, and people wanting to get rich quick. These things create a world where people like Lucas can become powerful.
You're so right. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of his rise and fall, but we can't forget the bigger picture. What do you think, listener? Does learning about Frank Lucas change how you see the drug trade? Or organized crime? Or even the American dream? We'd love to hear your thoughts.
We really encourage you to keep learning. Read more, do your own research, and form your own opinions. This deep dive was just the beginning. It was like a peek into a complicated world.
And remember, there are always different sides to every story. Keep asking questions, be curious, and never stop learning.
That's what's great about learning. It never ends. There's always something new to find out.
Thanks for taking us through this deep dive. It's been really eye-opening to learn about such a fascinating person from American history.
It was my pleasure. And to everyone listening, keep diving deep.
All right, so you wanted to dive into the history of organized crime in America.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we found a story, and it is fascinating and baffling all at the same time.
Oh, really?
It's about this guy, Frank Matthews.
Okay.
Now, you might not recognize the name, but trust me, his story,
Yeah.
It's like straight out of a movie, you know? A powerful drug lord
Right.
built this massive empire, made a ton of money,
Mm-hmm.
and then, poof, vanished. Without a trace.
Wow.
Took millions of dollars with him.
Oh, wow.
Millions.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So we're talking like real Scarface kind of stuff.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what makes this Frank Matthews case so fascinating, you know?
I see. Yeah.
It's not just a crime story. It's a window into a very specific moment in American history, really.
Oh, okay.
The late 60s, early 70s.
Interesting.
This was when all those traditional mafia families, you know, the ones you see in the movies,
Right, right.
they were starting to see their power challenged,
Right.
right? And ambitious figures, guys like Matthews, they were ready to step into that void.
Yeah, I can see that. So before we get into this whole mysterious disappearance, let's back up a bit.
Yeah.
Who was Frank Matthews, and how did he rise to power?
Right. So he starts out in Durham, North Carolina.
Okay.
What was his early life like?
Well, it definitely wasn't a life of privilege, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Some run-ins with the law, even as a teenager, actually.
Really?
Yeah. He even spent some time in juvie
Wow.
for assault.
Oh, wow.
It seems like even back then, you know, he had this daring, this willingness to kind of bend the rules a little.
Yeah, push it, right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it seems like those tendencies, they kind of followed him north.
Right.
First to Philadelphia, then to Brooklyn.
Mhm.
And it's like each move he took, each stop he made, it took him higher and higher up the criminal ladder.
Yeah.
So our sources say that he got his start in this world of numbers running. Can you explain what that is?
Sure. Yeah. Numbers running, sometimes they called it the numbers game.
Okay.
It was an illegal lottery, basically. Really popular in a lot of urban communities.
Oh, okay.
People could gamble small amounts of money and, well, they hope to win a bigger payout, you know?
So kind of a precursor to the lottery we have today.
Exactly. Yeah.
But run by these criminal organizations.
Yeah, basically. And it was a lucrative business, especially in those densely populated areas like Brooklyn.
Right.
And that's where that's where he really began to hone his skills as an organizer, you know?
Yeah.
Building this network of runners and collectors.
Right.
But he was clearly a man with, you know, bigger ambitions.
Yeah.
He realized pretty quickly the limitations of the numbers game.
Yeah.
So he set his sights on something much more lucrative,
Yeah.
the drug trade.
The drug world. And our sources describe a pretty rapid rise to power for him in this world.
It was.
Right. He starts dealing heroin and he connects with some real heavy hitters in that Philadelphia underworld.
He did.
Guys like Major Coxon, notorious gangster.
Yeah.
And members of this so-called Black Mafia.
Right.
Can you tell us a little more about the Black Mafia and their role in organized crime at the time?
Sure. The Black Mafia was this loosely organized group, African-American criminals.
Okay.
And they operated all over the U.S., various cities,
Yeah.
mainly involved in, you know, drug trafficking, extortion, gambling.
Right.
And they emerged partly because of those racial barriers that they faced, you know, within the traditional mafia families.
Right. So even in the criminal underworld,
Yeah,
there was segregation and a struggle for control.
absolutely.
Crazy.
Yeah. And Matthews, being an ambitious, savvy operator, he recognized this.
Yeah.
Saw an opportunity there, you know,
Right.
to build his own empire, independent of the mafia.
Right. And it seems like he tried to play the game, at least initially, right? Our sources say he reached out to some of the big mafia families in New York, the Gambinos, the Bananos,
Right.
but they weren't really interested in a full partnership with him.
Well, the rejection, that was a turning point for Matthews, really.
Right.
It solidified his determination, you know, to build his own power base.
Yeah.
Completely independent.
Right. So what did he do? Where did he find the connections, the supply to kind of launch his own operation?
Well, he found a key partner in this guy, Rolando Lucas Gonzalez Nunez,
Okay.
a Cuban mafia boss.
Okay.
Now, the Cuban mafia, that was another force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
They had strong connections in South America, which was a major source of cocaine and heroin at the time.
So this partnership gave Matthews direct access to the source.
Yes.
He was able to bypass those mafia middlemen. That's a big deal.
Huge. It allowed him to control the entire supply chain, importation, distribution.
Right.
Meant bigger profits.
Yeah,
You know,
of course. Yeah.
less reliance on anybody else.
Right. And he set up these incredibly sophisticated drug mills
He did.
in Brooklyn,
Yeah.
heavily fortified.
Yeah.
Guards armed to the teeth.
And we're not talking about some small-time operation.
Right.
I mean, one source describes a raid where they seized enough heroin to supply the entire East Coast for weeks.
Wow. So this guy was not just some back alley drug dealer.
No, no, no.
We're talking about a major...
He was. And Matthews wasn't shy about flaunting his success either.
Right, of course not.
I mean, he lived this lavish lifestyle, mansion on Staten Island.
Oh, wow.
A fleet of luxury cars,
Yeah, she's
frequent trips to Las Vegas for, gambling, money laundering.
a mansion on Staten Island. That's pretty close to where some of the big mob bosses lived, right?
It was, yeah. Some people saw that as a deliberate power play.
Right.
Like he was saying, hey, I'm here, I'm successful, and I'm not afraid of you.
Come and get me.
Yeah, exactly.
So he's got this growing empire, this life of luxury. Did he ever try and legitimize his business?
Mm-hmm.
Or was he always firmly in the criminal underworld?
No, there's no evidence that he ever seriously considered going legit.
Really?
Actually, it seems like his ambition went way beyond just running a successful criminal enterprise.
Right.
He wanted to, reshape the entire drug trade.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he started organizing these summits, bringing together major Black and Hispanic drug dealers from all over the country.
Wow.
Yeah.
So he's essentially trying to create this new power structure, one that challenges the dominance of these traditional mafia families.
That's exactly right, yeah.
Wow.
He envisioned this, network of independent drug lords,
Okay.
all working together to control the flow of narcotics into the U.S. It was a bold plan, audacious, and it put him directly in the crosshairs of some very, very dangerous people.
Well, I'm guessing that's where things start to get real complicated, right?
Yeah.
And maybe even dangerous for Frank Matthews.
You got it.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll dive into the escalating tensions and the eventual downfall of this incredibly ambitious and maybe reckless drug lord.
Can't wait.
Stay with us.
So Frank Matthews, he's building this massive drug empire, living large, and he's got this ambitious plan to kind of reshape the entire drug trade.
Right.
But, like you were saying, that's going to put him in some dangerous territory.
Oh, yeah, he was making a lot of enemies along the way.
Right.
Not just the traditional mafia families that he was trying to bypass, but, rival gangs.
Right.
Even some of his own associates.
Right.
People who might have been tempted by his success.
Yeah. I mean, our sources point to one group in particular that became a major problem for Matthews.
Yeah.
The Philadelphia Black Mafia.
Yeah.
They were already a powerful force in the drug world, and they weren't just going to sit back and watch Matthews muscle in on their territory.
Well, remember, this is a time when the drug trade is becoming increasingly violent.
Yeah.
I mean, there were a lot of different factions all vying for control.
Right. And they weren't afraid to use force to get what they wanted.
Right. And things really came to a head with this infamous Easter Sunday shootout in Atlantic City in 1972.
Oh, yeah.
It sounds like something straight out of a gangster movie.
It was a wild scene.
Really?
An Atlantic City nightclub, packed with people, celebrating Easter Sunday.
Wow.
Suddenly, gunfire erupts.
Oh, wow.
This wild shootout between Matthews' organization and the Philadelphia Black Mafia.
What sparked the violence?
Well,
Was it a planned hit? Or did things just kind of spiral out of control?
the exact trigger is still a little murky,
Okay.
but it's clear that tensions have been building between those two groups for some time.
Mm-hmm.
They were competing for control of lucrative drug routes,
Yeah.
distribution networks.
Right.
There was a lot of bad blood between them.
Yeah. I mean, this shootout had a huge impact, right?
Well, yeah, it did.
It's not just on the people involved, but I mean, on Matthew's reputation,
Mhm.
his ability to operate freely.
It really did.
Mhm.
5 people were killed in that shootout.
Oh, yeah.
Another 26 injured. Many of them innocent bystanders, just caught in the crossfire.
Wow. And it's almost unbelievable, but despite the large number of witnesses, no one came forward to testify against either group.
That's right.
So it really shows the power these organizations had, right?
Oh, yeah.
And the fear that they instilled in people.
Absolutely. Even in the face of such a horrific event, people were too scared to speak up.
Wow.
It also speaks to the code of silence that just permeated the criminal underworld. That loyalty to the organization and the deep distrust of law enforcement. I mean, it made people reluctant to cooperate with authorities,
Yeah.
even if it meant protecting those responsible for violence.
So the Easter Sunday shootout was a major turning point in the story of Frank Matthews.
It really was.
It showed just how violent the drug trade was and how difficult it would be for him to achieve his ambitions without making some really powerful enemies.
Yeah. It also exposed him to increased scrutiny from law enforcement.
Right.
I mean, that shootout brought unwanted attention to his operations, and the authorities were starting to close in.
Yeah. Our sources mention that Matthews had some close calls with the law even before the shootout.
He did.
Apparently, he was almost busted in a major heroin deal that went wrong with, of all people, the Genovese crime family, one of the most powerful mafia families in New York.
That's right. It seems Matthews had agreed to buy a large quantity of heroin from an associate of the Genovese family,
Okay.
but the deal went south. The associate took Matthews' money and fled to the Bahamas.
Wait, so Matthews got scammed by the mafia?
Yeah,
That's kind of ironic considering he was trying to break free from their control.
it does seem a bit ironic, doesn't it? But, it just shows that even someone as powerful and connected as Matthews wasn't immune to the double-crossing and treachery that was commonplace in the underworld.
Right. So what did Matthews do? Did he just kind of cut his losses and move on?
Well, not exactly. Matthews wasn't the kind of guy to let someone walk away with his money,
Right.
especially not someone connected to the mafia. He retaliated by kidnapping the associate's bodyguard.
Wow. That's a pretty bold move.
Yeah.
Kidnapping someone connected to the Genovese family. I mean, that's asking for trouble.
It was definitely a risky move,
Oh.
but it worked. The kidnapping put enough pressure on the associate that he eventually returned to the U.S., gave Matthews his money back, and delivered the heroin as promised.
So Matthews managed to salvage the deal and even kind of turn the tables on the mafia?
Yeah, he did.
But this whole episode probably didn't do him any favors with the law enforcement agencies that were already keeping a close eye on him.
You're right. The DEA was building a case against Matthews.
Right.
They were using all the tools at their disposal, undercover agents, informants,
Right.
and most importantly, wiretaps.
Those wiretaps must have been a gold mine of information for the DEA.
They were. The agents were listening in on Matthews' conversations, gathering evidence of his drug deals, his money laundering operations, his connections to other criminal figures. I mean, it was only a matter of time before they had enough to bring him down.
And that's exactly what happened in January of '73, right?
Yep. Matthews was arrested at the Las Vegas airport. Initially, he was held on a $5 million bail,
Wow.
which was an astronomical sum at the time.
Yeah.
He just shows how seriously the authorities were taking his case.
$5 million. That's a king's ransom. He must have had some serious resources to even think about making bail.
Oh, he did. His bail was eventually reduced to $325,000, which he was able to pay. He was released pending trial, scheduled to appear in court on July 2nd, 1973.
So he's out on bail, facing serious charges. Trial is looming. What happened next? Did he show up in court and fight the charges?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because on July 2nd, 1973, Frank Matthews vanished. He didn't show up for his court appearance, and he hasn't been seen since.
He just disappeared, like completely off the grid.
Completely.
Yeah.
Gone without a trace. And to make things even more intriguing, he took an estimated $20 million in cash with him.
So the drug lord who built this incredible empire, who outsmarted the mafia, who is facing serious prison time, he just pulled a vanishing act,
Yeah.
taking a fortune with him. It's almost too perfect, like something out of Hollywood script.
It is a story that bears belief, and that's what we're going to explore in the next part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
The mystery of Frank Matthews' disappearance and the theories about what might have happened to him.
Okay, so we've got this larger-than-life figure, Frank Matthews, who built this drug empire, challenged the mafia, and then just when it seems like, the walls are closing in, he pulls off this incredible disappearing act.
Right. I mean, it's almost too good to be true.
It is. Did he really manage to escape and start a new life? Or is there a darker truth lurking beneath the surface?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
The mystery of St. Matthew's disappearance, it's fueled speculation for decades. We've gone through all the research you sent, and there are a few prevailing theories, each with its own set of intriguing possibilities and unanswered questions.
Right. So let's start with what seems like the most obvious theory escape. Did Frank Matthews use his wealth and connections to vanish into thin air and build a new life for himself somewhere far away?
Well, it's certainly possible. I mean, especially considering the resources he had at his disposal. We're talking about a man who was earning millions of dollars, had connections all over the world.
Yeah.
And he clearly wasn't afraid to take risks.
Right. And there were rumors circulating for years.
Huh?
Sightings in different countries, whispers of him living the high life under a new identity.
Right. Yeah. Some sources mentioned possible sightings in South America,
Yeah.
Europe, even Africa.
Wow.
There were stories of him resurfacing in the Caribbean, living a life of luxury, surrounded by beautiful women, far removed from the reach of the law.
So it's almost like a modern-day pirate tale. The outlaw who escapes with his treasure and lives out his days on some tropical island.
It's a romantic image, for sure. But so far, none of these sightings has ever been confirmed.
Really?
No concrete evidence has ever emerged to prove that Matthews is actually alive and well, living under an assumed name.
So the escape theory is intriguing, but it's also pretty flimsy, right?
Yeah,
No solid proof, just rumors and speculation.
right.
What about the darker side of things?
Hmm.
Is there any evidence that points to foul play?
Well, given the world Matthews operated in, it's certainly a possibility that can't be ignored.
Right.
He crossed some very powerful people, mafia families, rival gangs, even people within his own organization
Right.
who might have seen an opportunity to take over.
Eliminating Matthews would have been a way to eliminate a major competitor.
Mm-mm.
Send a chilling message to anyone else thinking of challenging the status quo.
Exactly. And let's not forget that $20 million in cash he disappeared with.
Yeah, right.
I mean, that's a powerful motive right there.
It is. So who are the most likely suspects if we're looking at this foul play angle?
Well, the Philadelphia Black Mafia certainly had a score to settle with Matthews
Right.
after the Easter Sunday shootout.
Right.
I mean, they had the means, the motive
Yeah.
to take him out.
Right.
And there were rumors that Matthews had made some enemies within the Cuban Mafia as well.
But wouldn't those groups want to make a statement?
Mhm.
If they killed Frank Matthews, wouldn't they want everyone to know it was them?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
Sometimes, in the world of organized crime, the best way to eliminate a threat is to make it look like they just vanished.
Right.
No body, no evidence, no problem.
That's a chilling thought.
Yeah.
It's like he was erased from existence? A ghost story in the annals of organized crime?
And then there's the possibility that someone close to Matthews might have betrayed him,
Right.
a trust lieutenant,
Mm-hmm.
disgruntled associate, someone who saw a chance to seize power and wealth for themselves.
It's like something out of Shakespeare. The ambitious underling who betrays his master for a chance at the throne. But if that's the case, where's the evidence?
Right.
Wouldn't there be some trace of what happened to Matthews?
Well, it's possible that his body was disposed of in a way that left no trace.
Right.
Or maybe there are people out there who know the truth but have stayed silent all these years,
Right.
bound by fear or loyalty.
So we've got escape, we've got foul play.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other theories out there that might explain what happened to Frank Matthews?
There's one more theory, and it might be the most intriguing of all. Some people believe that Matthews might have struck a deal with the authorities.
You mean he turned informant?
Exactly.
Traded his knowledge of the criminal underworld for a chance to disappear and start a new life.
That's right. It's possible that Matthews, facing some serious prison time, decided to cut a deal with the DEA or the FBI. He had a lot of information about the drug trade,
Yeah.
the mafia,
Yeah.
corrupt officials, information that would be incredibly valuable to law enforcement.
So in this scenario, Matthews is living under a new identity, protected by the very people who are trying to put him behind bars. It's a pretty wild twist.
It is.
Yeah.
And it would explain why he was able to disappear so completely and why no one has ever been able to find him.
But if he did turn informant, why haven't we heard anything about it?
Right.
Wouldn't some of that information have come out over the years?
Maybe. Or maybe the authorities are still protecting him, keeping his new identity a closely guarded secret
Right.
for their own reasons.
So what's the bottom line? After all this research, all these theories, are we any closer to solving the mystery of Frank Matthews?
Unfortunately, no. The truth remains elusive. We've got these tantalizing clues, intriguing possibilities, but no definitive answers. Frank Matthews' disappearance remains one of the most enduring mysteries in the history of organized crime.
What a story. I mean, it's a real-life thriller, complete with ambition, betrayal, vast sums of money, and an ending that leaves us hanging. It really makes you wonder. What really happened to Frank Matthews? Did he escape and live out his days in some exotic locale? Was he silenced by his enemies, his body buried in some unmarked grave? Or did he strike a deal with the devil, trading his freedom for a life in the shadows? We may never know for sure. But one thing's for certain, the story of Frank Matthews is a powerful reminder of the allure and the danger of the criminal underworld. A world where fortunes are made and lost in the blink of an eye, and where the line between success and ruin is razor thin. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the mystery of Frank Matthews. We hope you enjoyed it, and maybe even learned a thing or two along the way. Until next time. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and never stop searching for the truth, no matter how elusive it may be.
Yeah.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive. We all know you guys are busy out there, and we respect your time.
Yeah,
So we promise to always get right to the point.
that's right. The good stuff. The insights.
We'll always bring you the crucial information without bogging you down in a mountain of irrelevant details. You ready to dive in?
Let's do it. Today, we're diving deep into a criminal complaint. This one was filed in the Central District of California.
Okay.
So we're talking Southern California. And it's pretty heavy stuff. This document lays out an FBI investigation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, not speculation or news reports or anything like that. This is straight from the court. It's a serious set of allegations.
This isn't some tabloid story, folks. This is the real deal.
Yeah.
And who's at the center of this investigation?
It's a guy named Eugene Henley Jr. You might know him as Big U.
Big U, okay?
And the FBI is calling this whole operation the Big U Enterprise.
All right, so the Big U Enterprise. Now, we always like to be upfront about our sources here. For this deep dive, we're focusing exclusively on this criminal complaint.
Exactly. That's our primary source.
That's our Bible for today, folks. So what's our goal here? What do we want to help our listeners understand by the end of this deep dive?
So the complaint itself, it's a big document, lots of detail. But we're going to sift through it all for you. We're going to pull out the core accusations against Henley.
All right, I'm ready. Lay it on me.
And we'll try to make sense of this Big U Enterprise. You know, how it allegedly worked, what it was all about, all based on what the FBI is claiming in this document.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. Who are we dealing with here? Who are these major players named in the complaint?
Well, you got Eugene Henley Jr., Big U himself, right at the center of it all. But it doesn't stop there. There are a bunch of other defendants named too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. We've got Sylvester Robinson, Mark Martin, Tremaine Ashley Williams, Armani Aflel, Frederick Blanton Jr., and Tiffany Shinrika Hines.
Okay, so a whole crew here.
A whole network. And the complaint goes into detail about their alleged roles in all of this as we dig in deeper.
Okay, so Big U, not just some random guy off the street, you know.
Oh, not at all. The complaint, it paints him as a pretty formidable figure. They say he's a purported former enforcer for the Rollin' 60s, a powerful street gang. And that's not all. They say he has a, shall we say, a well-documented history of violence.
So already not someone you want to mess with.
Definitely not. The complaint emphasizes his connection to the Rollin' 60s. They're saying he used that reputation, that history of violence, to basically give him the clout to run this whole Big U enterprise.
Okay, so power and intimidation, part of his MO.
Right. And here's another layer to it.
Mm-hmm.
The complaint mentions that in past interviews, Henley has actually compared himself to, get this, a modern-day mafia figure.
Whoa, okay. That's a bold claim.
It is, and it suggests how he views himself. He's not shying away from that image.
Okay, so we've got a powerful figure with a history of violence and sees himself as some sort of mob boss. This is getting intense.
Oh, yeah. And now we get to the meat of it. The complaint lays out a laundry list of alleged criminal activity. And I'm talking a wide range, from violent felonies to some pretty sophisticated financial fraud.
Okay, so give it to me straight. What are the big ones? What are the most serious allegations against Big U and this enterprise?
We're talking about murder, kidnapping, robbery, extortion. And then they get into interstate transportation for prostitution. That involved the Mann Act. Then there's wire fraud, bank fraud, and even tax offenses.
Whoa, that's a rap sheet.
And it doesn't stop there. The complaint also claims that members of the enterprise tried to throw off the FBI's investigation to cover their tracks.
Okay, so we're already seeing a pattern here. Intimidation, violence, and then trying to hide it all.
Exactly.
Now, there's this thing called the check-in that's mentioned in the complaint. This sounds particularly strange. Can you break that down for us? What was this check-in all about?
So this check-in was something Henley supposedly started, and it mainly targeted hip-hop artists and celebrities visiting L.A.
So, like a welcome to L.A., but not in a nice way.
Not exactly. The complaint makes it sound like these folks were expected to get permission to pay tribute to Big U and his crew.
You've got to be kidding me. They had to pay to be in L.A.
That's what the FBI is alleging, almost like a toll. And the complaint even quotes Dr. Dre. Remember that docuseries where he talked about the value of having an OG to clear the streets?
Yeah.
Well, the complaint ties that right into this check-in. They're saying Big U used his OG status, his tough guy image, to make people think he owned L.A. And they quote someone saying, "Not one human being who not gonna check in."
So basically they're saying he was running a protection racket.
That's what it sounds like. He's playing on fear and this idea of respect, but it's all about control.
It's like a twisted version of hospitality.
Right. And complaint goes on to say that Henley also tried to present himself as a legitimate figure, a pillar of the community.
So he's playing both sides.
Apparently so.
Yeah.
He set up nonprofits, like developing options, they say,
Mm-hmm.
and he was asking celebrities for donations, trying to get grant money.
So on one hand, this fearsome gangster, and on the other, a philanthropist. That's a weird mix.
It is. But the complaint suggests it was deliberate, maybe a way to deflect suspicion, to gain influence. It's like a classic tactic, honestly. You see it in organized crime sometimes.
A wolf in sheep's clothing.
Yeah, that's one way to put it.
Okay, let's move on to the specific allegations. The complaint talks about the murder of someone they're calling RW. What happened there?
This is where things get really dark. The complaint claims Henley murdered RW in Las Vegas back in January 2021. They found his body in the desert, multiple gunshot wounds.
Brutal.
And the complaint says it was all about retaliation. They say RW had made a diss track, a song disrespecting Big U and the Enterprise.
So someone spoke out of turn and paid the ultimate price.
That's the implication. And it gets even creepier. The complaint actually quotes some of the lyrics. It talks about getting shot in the face and a .38 revolver with no trace.
Geez, talk about foreshadowing. But how do they tie Henley to this? What's the evidence?
They've got travel records. They say Henley and Sylvester Robinson went to Vegas together in a dark gray Lexus. And there's a witness, they call him Witness 1, who saw Henley and Robinson at a recording studio in Vegas, said they were acting strangely.
Suspicious behavior.
Yeah, and then there's the phone records. The complaint details cell phone location data for phones they say belong to Henley. And guess what? Around the time of the murder, the location data just stops for a while. And when it comes back online, it lines up with the estimated time it would have taken to travel to where the body was found.
So the phone's going silent, almost as incriminating as if they'd caught him on camera.
Exactly. And you know what's ironic? The complaint actually quotes Henley himself from a Drink Champs interview.
Huh?
He says, phones tell all about where you've been.
Yeah, well, his actions seem to contradict his words in this case.
For sure. And Witness 1, remember them? They said when Henley got back to the studio, he was soaking wet. Claimed he'd been at the gym.
In the middle of the night. That's a little hard to believe.
Seems that way.
What about physical evidence from the crime scene itself?
They found DNA on RW's ankle and sock. They think he was dragged. The DNA wasn't conclusive. They couldn't definitively link it to Henley. But they did rule out Robinson.
Okay, so not a smoking gun, but it doesn't help his case either.
Nope. And there's more. After the murder, the complaint says recording equipment disappeared from the studio and security cameras were suddenly disabled.
Sounds like a cover-up.
That's what it looks like.
Did the FBI talk to anyone who knew RW? Did they have any suspicions?
They did. The complaint says they talked to his family and friends, and they all pointed the finger at Henley. And get this, RW sent Henley an Instagram message right before he disappeared. And Henley never responded, which was totally out of character for them.
Interesting. So a sudden change in communication.
Exactly.
Now, the complaint mentions intercepted communications, wiretaps. What did those reveal?
Yeah, so the FBI was listening in on Henley and his crew in 2023, and they caught them talking about the investigation into RW's death. Yeah, pretty much. Apparently, detectives went to Henley's house, and he freaked out. He didn't go home for 2 weeks, made Robinson drive his car around, and in one call, Henley straight up tells Martin he wants to meet face-to-face because he thinks the feds are tapping his phone.
So he knew they were onto him.
It seems so.
Wow, okay. So we've covered murder, intimidation, cover-ups. But what about the financial crimes? The complaint goes deep on robbery and extortion too, right?
It does, and they suggest that this was another big part of how the Big U enterprise operated. It was about money and maintaining their control.
All right, break it down for us.
Well, they talk about this robbery of an unlicensed marijuana dispensary that went down on July 5, 2021. And the victim, they call him Victim 1, he'd been paying the Big U enterprise protection money for years.
Extortion, classic mob tactic.
Right. And guess who was allegedly involved in the actual robbery? Sylvester Robinson and Tremaine Ashley Williams.
Figures.
And here's the kicker. During the robbery, they made the victim call Henley.
So like rubbing it in his face.
Exactly. Showing him who's boss. And afterward, they actually returned some of the stolen money. The complaint suggests it was a way to keep the victim in their pocket, to set him up for more extortion later.
So calculated.
Oh yeah, very strategic.
And it gets even wilder. The complaint says Tremaine Ashley Williams basically confessed to this robbery on a podcast.
You're not kidding. He went on the No Jumper podcast and spilled the beans.
Oh,
Talked about the robbery, talked about how Henley would return some of the money as a manipulation tactic. And then, guess what? The episode got taken down after a cease and desist.
wow. Damage control.
Seems like it. But even after saying he wasn't with Big U anymore, Williams kept making threats and talking about robberies.
He couldn't help himself.
Apparently not. There was an alleged assault outside where they filmed No Jumper. He even posted a YouTube video threatening violence and talking about robbing celebrities who didn't check in.
He was still playing the game.
Yeah, and he didn't stop there. He claimed he was with Henley when rapper PNB Rock was robbed and murdered. And he even talked about kidnapping a famous rapper. Said he was with Henley for that too.
These guys weren't exactly keeping a low profile.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And the feds were listening. The complaint details intercepted calls where Robinson uses the slang lick for robbery and talks about taking over victim one's dispensary. And there's this crazy story where Henley, Mark Martin, and others supposedly staged a fake robbery to get back stolen equipment from a celebrity rapper. They even caught Henley and another guy, Zahir Mitchell, a.k.a. Brick Baby, on the phone, allegedly talking about splitting the loot from some robberies.
So these robberies, they weren't just random acts. They were planned, organized.
That's what the complaint suggests. And they weren't just going after anyone. They targeted people they knew they could exploit.
Like victim one, they really went after him, didn't they?
They did. The complaint lays out years of extortion. They've got recordings of phone calls, payment records, dates, amounts, the whole 9 yards.
This poor guy.
Robinson even told him straight up that the payments were like a retainer fee for protection.
Protection from the very people who were robbing him.
Exactly. That's the twisted logic.
And the complaint details this incident at Deja Vu, Henley's birthday party. What happened there?
So Henley throws this birthday bash at Deja Vu, and he makes a deal with the owner for a cut of the profits. Then he gets greedy and starts making threats, saying he wants all the money. He demands 30 grand in cash plus a percentage of the bar's future earnings. The complaint even quotes some of his phone calls, and they say his threats were super aggressive.
So much for a happy birthday.
Yeah, not exactly a celebratory mood.
The complaint also alleges that Henley was involved in prostitution, specifically interstate transportation for prostitution. And it mentions the Mann Act. Can you explain what that is for those who might not know?
Sure. The Mann Act is a federal law that basically makes it illegal to transport women across state lines for the purpose of prostitution. So the complaint is alleging that Henley and Armani Afflel were running some kind of prostitution ring, bringing women from California to Vegas.
And what evidence do they have to support these allegations?
Well, they've got those wiretaps again. The complaint mentions intercepted calls between Henley and Afflel. In one call, they're allegedly talking about making women get naked and perform sexual acts. Pretty explicit stuff. And they also have a witness, a woman who says she transported other women from California to Vegas for prostitution and that she was paid $1,000 by Henley to do it.
Wow, that's pretty damning.
It is. So we've got murder, extortion, robbery, prostitution. And it doesn't stop there. The complaint also accuses Henley and his associates of a whole bunch of financial crimes.
Right, we talked about the violence and intimidation, but this is a whole other level of criminal enterprise.
Absolutely.
What were they up to on the financial side of things?
Well, for starters, they alleged that Henley committed fraud to get a COVID relief loan.
Oh, no, not that.
Yeah, the complaint claims he got a $90,000 loan through his music company, Unmeek Music, by lying about their revenue. They say he inflated the numbers to make it seem like his business was hurting more than it was.
So taking advantage of a program meant to help struggling businesses.
That's the allegation. And it gets worse. They say he was embezzling money from his own charity, Developing Options.
You've got to be kidding me. Stealing from a charity.
That's what they're saying. The complaint lists specific donors and amounts, tens of thousands of dollars, that were supposed to go to things like youth football and social justice programs. But the money allegedly ended up in Henley's personal accounts.
So much for community betterment.
Yeah, not exactly living up to the mission statement. And there's more. The complaint accuses Henley, Mark Martin, Frederick Blanton Jr., and Tiffany Shanrika Hines of bank fraud. They supposedly cooked Blanton's income record so he could qualify for a bigger mortgage than he deserved.
So they were manipulating the system left and right.
Seems that way. Yeah, and of course, where there's financial fraud, there's often tax fraud. The complaint accuses Henley of not reporting the money he allegedly embezzled from developing options, which means he was dodging taxes, too.
This guy thought he was above the law.
It certainly seems that way. But the FBI was watching, and they were building their case. And the complaint doesn't just focus on these big, headline-grabbing crimes. It also mentions a bunch of other shady dealings.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, they say Henley tried to strong-arm a witness in an assault case involving one of his associates.
Oh, wow. Obstruction of justice.
Basically. The FBI had wiretaps on Henley, and they caught him telling the victim's relative to pressure the victim into picking the wrong guy in a lineup. He even coached the relative on a fake story to tell the cops.
Jeez. So he was trying to control every aspect of this case.
It seems so. And then there are all the threats. The complaint mentions tons of intercepted calls where Henley's bragging about violence and making threats against people who crossed him. It's all about creating this atmosphere of fear, of showing everyone who's in charge.
Yeah, that's a recurring theme here.
Definitely. And they even mention an incident where Robinson is talking about threats made to someone called Jew Boy. It's pretty disturbing.
So they're not just threatening rivals or enemies. They're going after anyone they perceive as a threat, even someone with a nickname like Jew Boy.
It paints a pretty bleak picture of how they operated.
So after building this massive case, where did the FBI go from there?
Well, the complaint lays out all the places they wanted to search for evidence. They wanted to search Henley himself, his Mercedes, both his houses in L.A. They wanted to search Sylvester Robinson and his place in Northridge, Mark Martin and his place in L.A., and the Developing Options Office on Crenshaw Boulevard.
So they were casting a wide net.
They were. And the complaint goes into detail about why they believed these specific locations would have evidence. They talk about surveillance they conducted, financial records they obtained, the content of the wiretaps, all sorts of things.
So they had to connect the dots, show the judge they had good reason to believe these places held evidence of the crimes.
Exactly. And they use everything. Phone location data, eyewitness accounts, surveillance footage. They even mentioned that they saw Henley and Robinson at their respective homes, and Henley driving his Mercedes. The complaint says that Henley's Arlington property was allegedly used for illegal activities separate from his main residence. They say they have evidence that the Developing Options location on Crenshaw Boulevard is their current address, and that it was being used for fraudulent activities.
So it's not just about speculation. They're providing concrete reasons why they want to search these places.
Exactly. They're not just throwing darts at a map. And the complaint goes even further. They say they want to search digital devices, even use biometric features to unlock them if they have to. They argue that this is necessary because of the nature of the crimes and the evidence they've already gathered. And they mentioned that they had already tried to subpoena data related to the investigation, so they knew there was more digital evidence out there.
It's pretty comprehensive.
It is.
And just to reiterate for our listeners, everything we've talked about today comes directly from this criminal complaint.
Yeah.
We haven't added any speculation or conjecture. We've presented the information as it is laid out in the document.
That's right. It's crucial to remember that these are allegations, and Henley and his associates are innocent until proven guilty. But this complaint gives us a very detailed glimpse into the FBI's investigation, and it's a pretty disturbing picture.
Yeah, there's no sugarcoating it. This deep dive has definitely delivered some of those aha moments we promise, even if they're more unsettling than exciting in this case. This whole case really makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. You've got this guy allegedly running a criminal enterprise involved in violence and fraud, but he's also trying to build this image as community leader, a philanthropist. And it makes you wonder how many other people are out there doing the same thing. How many organizations are hiding behind a facade of good intentions while secretly engaging in criminal activity? It's a pretty sobering thought.
It is. It's a reminder that things aren't always what they seem. And it makes you question, who can you trust?
Absolutely. And that's something we're thinking about long after this deep dive is over.
Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll catch you next time.
See you then.